to make an analogy between comfort and emotions. Just a quick note, I am working with comfort as a general concept, but today's examples are gonna refer mostly to thermal comfort and some daylighting, mainly because that's my field of expertise, and also because that's the data I've gathered so far. So the rest of my PhD is gonna be about trying to generalize this idea for other domains of comfort, such as acoustics and air quality, right? So let's talk about comfort. Every time I say I'm working with comfort, the first thing that people tell me is that comfort is subjective. Like saying that you cannot work with comfort, right? That comfort is a state of the mind. But if I let that stop me, I wouldn't do anything. So
yeah, hang on. Just listening to this, but I can't be
hello. So if I let the subjectivity issue stop me, we would never do anything about comfort. But we have done some stuff. In fact, in the 70s, Fanger proposed one of the first and one of the most popular models of thermal comfort called the rational or physiological approach. And he basically removed the idea of subjectivity from the comfort equation. So he said he modeled the human body as a machine, perhaps, that generates heat and exchanges heat with the environment. And from that, you can calculate balances and imbalances of heat, and that would generate a thermal sensation, so feeling cold, hot, or neutral. And it's assumed that if you feel neutral or close to neutral, you're comfortable, right? The problem with this model is that it's developed in a lab, and it doesn't work well all the time. So there's a paper published in 2019 that they said that 2 out of 3 times is wrong. I'm not sure if this is fair. I don't think Fanger's model was developed for predicting individuals' thermal sensation. I think it's about having a general idea of what would groups of people think. But anyway, still, it's not a good predictor necessarily. And that's something that we didn't have to wait until 2019 to know that. People in the so-called adaptive approach to thermal comfort, they've been saying that comfort is in the mind of the beholder for years. This is actually the title of a conference paper published by Richard Dedier and some colleagues. And he's probably one of the most remarkable proponents of the adaptive approach to thermal comfort. In this paper, he explains what this approach does. And it says a person's thermal history and adaptation level, including behavioral, psychological, and physiological processes operating at various temperatures, at various timescales, also influence thermal comfort, right? So instead of starting from the idea that thermal sensation is the only driver for comfort, the adaptive model says that comfort is a state of the mind, which is great. But then in the same paper, he explains how research is done usually. He said that the basic research design is to gather paired observations of objective indoor climatic parameters and comfort rating scales, which is basically Likert scales. So asking them whether they feel comfortable, whether they feel neutral or not. Now, this hasn't changed to 2020. Richard Dedier, Parkinson, and Brager, all great researchers in this field, they say the same thing. The analysis they're doing is by calculating thermal neutralities, which are assumed to be comfort temperatures again, and correlating that to indoor air temperatures. So what's the mistake that I see here is that first we're assuming again that thermal neutrality, so feeling neither cold nor hot, is comfort, which even adaptive thermal comfort books say it's not true. And that we're trying to predict something that depends on human psychology based only on indoor air temperatures. So just as Fanger said, basically between 20 and 25 degrees, you should feel comfortable. These models are saying, in the end, when you see the result is, in winter, 20 degrees is all right. In summer, 25, it's all right. So the psychology is sort of removed or hidden. And therefore, this is almost, and I'm stretching this a little bit, but this is almost as saying as comfort is a physiological phenomenon, and physiological neutrality implies comfort. And this is a contradiction. I see this as a contradiction that it's everywhere. Alusiams and Sokala in '97 published a small book that is in the library. I want to reread it because the contradiction is just too evident. They say physiological neutrality does not necessarily mean comfort. So comfort is a state of the mind. But then they say in page 3 of the same book, comfort is the minimization of physiological responses, saying that comfort is a physiological phenomenon. This is a post in LinkedIn. I removed the picture and the name of who posted it, but he's an actually distinguished lecturer. He says that comfort is a perception formulated by the brain, which is great. Comfort is then a state of the mind. But then in the same paragraph says that when people say they're cold, it's cold in here, what they're saying is that heat is leaving their body at a rate greater than it can be replaced. So no state of the mind at all in the end. Then there's a book published, Bean 2020, saying that the roots of thermal comfort are based upon physiology and equally important psychology. So then again, comfort is a state of the mind. But then the thermal comfort factors don't include any psychological element. So there's tension in the field of comfort, if you want, at least in thermal comfort, and in visual comfort, it's sort of the same idea, between this idea of comfort being a state of the mind in principle, but in practice it never is. And I see, and I've heard teachers and professors complaining how students or industry stick to the numbers and stick to the temperature and forget that comfort is a state of the mind. But the truth is that our guidelines, our models for calculating don't really reflect the state of the mind part of comfort. Now, these two different paradigms, which are contradicting, I mean, they shouldn't exist together, but they do. And the reason for that, I think it's very simple. Every time we do mathematical modeling of anything, we simplify the world, right? So since there is no really an absolute standard for thermal comfort, but we know that in general, comfort occurs when physiological effort regulation is minimized, we'll take that as a proxy for comfort. Effectively removing all the subjectivity from the matter, almost all. Now, this is a daylighting quote, actually. Christoph Reinhardt saying that there is a fear that quality assessment of the space, for instance, the visual interest of the space, leaves too much room for subjective interpretation. And I think this may be the reason why psychology is removed from these models, because there's a fear that subjectivity will lead to an infinite rabbit hole, rendering all these models unusable because they're just too complex. But I don't think subjectivity necessarily means chaos. Subjectivity implies that people are entitled to like something, and you cannot tell them they're really wrong, but it doesn't mean that there's no consensus. So for instance, people may be entitled to like the rooms to be at 5 degrees Celsius at night. They just don't. They rarely do. The same way people may like windows with rooms with no windows, or triangular doors and floors that are non-flat or whatever, right? The world is much less chaotic in all sorts of subjective things. And for some reason, comfort is always treated as, no, we can't work with that. We need to reduce it to oversimplify to something that is thermodynamics, or in the case of visual comfort, we work with contrast and we work with the eye as a sensor instead of asking people or working with the psychology of it. So the propositions for this presentation, and I'm not sure if these are going to be the propositions in my thesis, but are that given that comfort is subjective experience, everyone says that in principle, every book on comfort says that in principle, then it cannot be limited to physiological sensations such as glare and daylight sufficiency or contrast or thermal sensation. Therefore, I would propose that current models cannot properly represent comfort, real comfort, which is sort of obvious because we are making simplifications. The second proposition is that embracing psychology and subjectivity can help solving this. which is also obvious. Like adding more complexity to a model usually improves it if you do it properly. And the third one is I think my contribution is that despite being subjective, comfort might be the consequence of a relatively small and therefore manageable number of factors. And I will try to show you that third part in this presentation. So I did some research, which meant interviews, right? This is already somehow new in building science. We tend to not ask things to people. We tend to give them small questionnaires that they can answer Likert scale so we can use numbers. But I just let them talk. I interviewed so far 18 people, 9 from New Zealand, 9 from Chile, 9 male, 9 female, and so on and so forth. All of them had purchased a house recently. I was looking for people who had searched for houses, but they all happened to already bought a one. And what I asked them to, I mean, the only question of this interview was to describe a warm house and to describe a house with good natural light. And from that description, I extracted the following ideas. First of all, comfort in residential settings is a goal in itself. It's not a means to anything. People don't want to be comfortable to be productive at home. They don't want to be comfortable, not even to save money. They want to be comfortable just because they want to feel comfortable. It's a matter of quality of life. I cannot put my finger in anything different. A cold house is just uncomfortable. On a warm house in the winter, more than any other season, it gives you a surplus, a well-being surplus that you appreciate. You actually want to get to a warm house. And this quote also reveals something that is interesting, that comfort, when you approach comfort from a physiological or a thermal sensation point of view, if you want, it's always negative or neutral. So the best house you can aspire is a not bad house and not uncomfortable house, because every physiological response implies discomfort. So the best you can be is relaxed, if you want. In this case, this person is revealing that the comfort is positive. You want to get to a warm house. It's not just that you don't want to escape from it. And then I get there in the evening. This person was talking about a house in Mount Victoria that he wanted, he didn't have, but he said, I can read a book or drink a beer with the sun over me, right? Now, he doesn't want the sun to be able to read it. He just wants the sun. Reading a book is just an example. He wants to feel comfortable. And from that feel comfortable starts my comfort emotion analogy. Right? Comfort, I would say it's something like an emotion. I cannot say it's an emotion. The literature in emotions is quite chaotic, and I don't have the authority on saying that, and it would be getting into trouble. So it's just an analogy. I think I propose that comfort can be treated as an emotion, and specifically, I'm using the model of emotions. This model gathered ideas from 2 other models of emotion and says that emotions don't just happen instantly, they develop over time in a cyclic system. So you start from a situation that you need to pay attention to. From that, you evaluate the situation in what it's called an appraisal. So it's a cognitive process. It's a fully cognitive process. It's a state of the mind. And then it generates a response, which is the emotion. So the response is not people's behavior, is the emotion itself. In my case, that response is going to be a certain level of comfort, which I need to put names to everything here. I'm developing new language. How does it look in my case? The situation includes 3 elements. So objective climatic variables, which is what we've been using for years in building science. So temperature, wind speed, relative humidity, contrast, light, illuminance, and so on. Environmental cues is just everything else, everything we can't measure about the physical world. So smell, maybe you can measure that, I don't know. How it looks, is the view nice? Everything that people can use for making inferences or getting ideas. And then there's people internal elements. And this is interesting because a situation is not a physical situation. It's a psychologically relevant situation. So your expectations, your lifestyle, your perception of control, your budget, if you want, your household composition, they're all relevant in the way you perceive different situations. Then you pay attention to it. And the appraisals are done based on three concepts. First is perception, which is again thermal sensation, glare, and what in building science we've been using for years. Then there's inferences. So you want to know how long is it going to be warm, the house. You don't want it to be just a momentary thing. You want it to remain warm forever, hopefully. And then there's trade-offs. So what did you sacrifice in order to become warm, to get comfortable? And that leads to comfort. And comfort may, from that level of comfort, you may behave and engage with the environment. So put a sweater, turn the heater on if you can, and so on and so forth. Something interesting about the attention is that it raises a question: is every time you go and ask people about the thermal sensation, you are forcing them to pay attention. Maybe they will say they're uncomfortable or comfortable, even if they weren't thinking about it. So they weren't uncomfortable until you asked them, maybe. That's one of the questions that this model would raise. Now, how does it work? Let me compact this and try to explain it a little bit. So the first thing to say is that what we understand of building in building science for comfort is contained in this model. So objective climatic variables lead to perceptions that are leading to comfort. Now, since perception are the only thing that leads to comfort, it's only natural to use it as a proxy. And that's why thermal sensation has been so often assumed to be the main predictor for comfort, right? A neutral thermal sensation is comfort. Now, I'm arguing a couple of things. So the first thing is that environmental cues are relevant. There are a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there is evidence showing that, for instance, in 2007, Rawls published this. He says that people in a fridge at 23 degrees felt colder than in a room at 23 degrees. Rawls is a psychologist. He says that the reason for this is intuition, is that from past experience, since you know, your brain knows, your subconscious brain knows that fridges are cold, you feel cold, right? Some of my data reveals that, and I'm still recoding that, but it says something about. So how a space looks, it's relevant, and people will change their answers to thermal sensation votes based on how the space looks or whether they know the temperature. Rawls also made this experiment of telling people temperatures. Sometimes they were wrong, sometimes they were right, and seeing how the thermal sensation changed based on knowing a temperature, even if it's wrong. Internal elements are relevant, again, in thermal comfort and even in daylighting as well, in visual comfort. We would say everyone is different. So some people are less tolerant or more tolerant due to physiological or anatomical reasons to cold or to glare. But my data shows that it's not only that. So respondent 2 in Chile, for instance, said that when you do not have children, cold does not matter. I don't care about children, about cold, if I'm not with my kids, right? So the situation is psychological. This is not a thermal sensation that he's feeling. He's extending his concern about comfort to family and household. Perception, I'm gonna skip it just because it's what we already know, although my data is revealing that we need to worry about more sensations that we've been, or perceptions that we've been talking about. For instance, in daylighting, people mentioned obviously glare and being able to read is one thing, but there's also the sense of connection with the exterior. You wanna know how time is going. You wanna know if it's day or night when you wake up in the morning. So those are perceptions, I would say, that we haven't studied at all, that I'm aware of. Inferences refer to your sense of stability. So physiological neutrality will not imply comfort if you don't think that's gonna last. So one respondent here in Wellington said that she liked to feel the rain as long as she knew it was not going to affect her. So just getting the idea of rain is gonna get in my house, it feels cold. It's a concern related to warmth. Remember that I asked her to describe a warm house. And she said she didn't like to hear the rain, or if she heard it, she wanted to hear it knowing that she was not going to get into the house. And finally, but I think this is pretty important in my model, is trade-offs. So physiological neutrality does not imply comfort if sacrifices were made to achieving such a state. One example, and just one example, is how many layers of clothing do you use? In a cold house, you will need to put a jacket, which is awful, right? But there's also money. People don't just spend all the money required to be comfortable. They struggle to decide how much money they can spend. There's also safety. So not all heaters are equally safe. There's privacy with daylighting. You want more windows, but you don't want to be exposed, and so on. So if you ask me what is a comfortable house or comfortable home, well, it's one that it not only is warm, and I'm going to use warm just to generalize that to other domains. Not only is warm, which means it just satisfies perception, also looks warm, which satisfies the inferences, so you feel safe, and it doesn't force people to choose between warmth and other nuisances. And what I'm trying to build now, and this is my final slide, is a model. This is what I'm calling the atlas of comfort. It's not finished, but each concentric circle is one element in the model. So person internal elements, environmental cues, objective climatic measurements, perception, trade-offs, and comfort. And the codes that are left in comfort are about freedom and about well-being. People want to live their lives free. They don't want the house to tell them what to do, and they want the house to feel like it's good for them. So this is, for me, comfort according to my data. This is a comfortable house. This is the goal that we should try to develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman. If we could give him a virtual clap, if you can find the virtual clap symbol, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Cool. So any questions? Just again, raise your virtual hand or your actual hand if you've got your video on. I can nearly see everyone. Any questions? Can I start off with one just before I can see Nigel's just put up his hand. Just about what got you interested in this topic in the first like why are you excited by it?
It's a long story, but I'm gonna make it short. So as an engineer, I wanted to sell comfortable houses because that's, I think, the way that houses will get better, because politicians are not improving building codes. So if we allow developers to make money by selling comfort, I think that would help, at least partly. And what they told me is that people don't want comfort. They're not interested. And I found that really weird. And I started researching comfort and what people meant by comfort and how can we offer comfort. And I asked the questions and I found this data and I said, well, we don't know anything about comfort really. And that's what I'm doing now.
Right. Oh, fantastic. Nigel, you've got a question.
Yes, Herman. I see you did your study in New Zealand and in Chile, presumably to see if there were differences between the two countries.
Yes.
Two parts to the question. Number one, were the differences? And number two, are the cultures in the two countries different enough to expect differences?
There's always differences. It depends on the level of abstraction where you analyze it, I think. So in the details, of course, there were. In Chile, most people don't like carpets. So at that level of detail, they were. But these blocks that I showed you, they were present both in Chile and in New Zealand. So this idea of trade-offs, they were mentioned every time in Chile and in New Zealand. The idea of the role of perception, they were similar. So they were more similar than different, I would say. The cultures, I think they're pretty different. I would describe Chilean culture as a Western culture, although sometimes they classify us as Latin, which I don't know what that means. But it's since, I mean, it was conquered by Spain, so it's different in that sense from New Zealand, right? So from the very origin of the country, we have had different cultures, and the climate is different. It's very different. So in Santiago and Wellington, they have very different weather, climate and weather.
Mm. Regan, I feel like you should ask a question, because I'm just interested in how comfortable your space is, because you're wearing a hat.
Yeah, someone asked that in the chat.
I feel real guilty here. Here I am, probably the most unhappiest person according to Herman, because I'm all togged up, in my little work from home space. But I have a favourite saying, which is, engineers have feelings, which I often have to repeat in the School of Architecture, that as an engineer we care about other things than solely the numbers. Well, we should care, and that's why I think I congratulate you, Herman, on choosing what will be a difficult topic to study. There's no doubt about that. But the question I've got from my freezing cold bunker down here in the garage is, where I'm quite happy and I'm very, my well-being is fine. What I'm wondering about is, are there spatial things that are showing up in your survey data that sort of kind of lead towards this warmth or comfort? For instance, materiality. We have this, not assumption, but there is a sense that earth and wood are warmer materials to deal with than, say, steel. And from the light perspective, is having, say, light on more than one wall more comfortable and more light? Do you actually feel better or more comfortable in either one? Or, but the point I'm trying to make is, are there spatial issues or spatial things that we can learn about as we move from this rational design to a kind of architectural design, I guess, to understand what are the factors that make buildings comfortable?
So I am not, warm materials and warm materials, they were mentioned, right? So, and light colors, they were also mentioned in daylighting. But I'm not getting into the specific of which materials exactly. I think there's two reasons why materials may be important. First, because there's a physical reason that some materials feel warmer. So the contact temperature is not the same in timber as in concrete. But I'm not getting into the how many windows do you need. I think that would be a second stage when we start doing research on these perceptions that I'm identifying, right? So I would like to know how much direct light do you need to actually feel that, or to feel that you're connected to the exterior and knowing the weather, the weather. So yes and no, I guess. And I want to mention something. So someone is saying here that they're asking me whether you are uncomfortable because you're wearing a jacket. Well, you said you were cold, or you were in a cold place. But just to make some precision there is, if you're fine wearing a jacket, then you're comfortable. But some people sometimes feel they're forced to wear more layers than they would like to because it's cold. So the question wouldn't be, are you uncomfortable? The question would be, would you like it to be warmer so you could take off your hat and your jacket? That's the positive concept of comfort that I'm trying to use here. Is it somehow clear?
Yeah, and for the record, the reason I have the hat and scarf on is because I can't turn the heater on at the same time. It's a fan heater, so it makes a hell of a noise.
That's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Which was part of your definition, wasn't it? The last part of your definition. Any final questions?
I can't see hand.
Lots of virtual hands clapping. Oh,
go, Michael.
Oh, well, Tane, go for it.
Okay.
I'm the supervisor, so I was going to say some thanks at the end, but question should be first. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I thought like your introduction to the research problem and working through the literature was really clear. That was actually one of the better ones I've seen in quite a while, actually. So thank you for sharing that with what looks like quite a large community of other PhD candidates. So thanks for preparing that so clearly, because I think people often jump through what they know quite quickly. So I thought you did that really nicely. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mike, will you?
Yeah, okay. Well, I wanted to, as one of the 3 supervisors, and the other 2 are here. Where are we? Michael Lee Johnstone from the Commerce faculty and Casimir McGregor from Brands have been, I think, hugely influential in adding to my physicist's background and focusing...
And to my engineering.
Well, exactly. and focusing Herman and my attention onto a broader range, the range that we wanted to explore, but bringing the expertise. So I just wanted to acknowledge those 2 contributions as having helped immensely in focusing this research. Congratulate, as Tang did, Herman on a very elegant and erudite presentation, because I think it influenced the the engagement that we could all have with where you're currently at. I mean, it's partway through the thesis. I have to say, well, if this model works, let's apply it to acoustics and air quality and see if it still works. I think that's essentially what stage 2 of this thesis is about. But just wanted to thank everyone for coming and encourage them, if they don't want to ask a question right now, to email Herman and engage in a conversation, because the broader the conversation, the better the research will be.
Fantastic. So yeah, we wish you luck, Herman, in
Thank
the
you.
remainder of your PhD, and hopefully we'll get to hear from you again towards the end, perhaps.